I was thinking where to focus this presentation because there is a very fine border between advocacy communication, which is actually a specific part of communications, and a lot of what we do in crowdsourcing, of course, and trying to influence people's opinion about the air quality and trying to influence decision makers is more about advocacy. But that's something that you guys have discussed already. We have been talking about in the morning of this conference, and we'll be talking again in the other sessions. So I thought it would be better to be very specific here and focus on the challenges of communication as an act of trying to engage the audience on a particular issue. So the actual act of communicating and what the major challenges are, where they see them, how we have addressed them. So engagement strategies for citizen crowdsourcing on air quality. I had to split this in two, because the first thing is how do we engage people about crowdsourcing. As I'm sure you've met in your own experience, crowdsourcing is not a concept which is very widely known for the general audience, and a concept which does not translate well in any of the languages that we've been using. Crowdsourcing, at least in the context where I've thrown it out to the public, sorry, am I far from the microphone? Yeah. Okay, all right. Crowdsourcing is very often confused with crowdfunding, which is a little bit more popular for the general audience. And people seem to confuse the one with the other. When we tell them, listen, we're crowdsourcing, and they ask, well, how much money have you gathered already? Which is, of course, not the point here. So one thing that we had to establish very early on is that using crowdsourcing should always go hand in hand with a small explanation what this is all about. And in the Bulgarian campaign, we always use gathering the wisdom of the crowd. It's a bit longer, but it's a lot more precise in terms of what we want from citizens and how we court them, if you like, to take participation in this. So the first thing is communicating what this entire process is about. How does it work? The second major challenge, especially in countries, we've mentioned that in the previous panel, in countries that differ in the level of public trust, internal public trust, but also public trust towards the public institutions, is trying to define how do we present the expected results. Over-promising is not a good idea, because then the day of reckoning will come and we will have to face the fact that we have not been able to accomplish everything that we have promised. Underselling is not a strategy either, because then it will be very hard to get people to do something if they don't realize that what they're going to do is going to have some impact. And by the way, impact is the key figure and the key word for this presentation. I'm going to come back to it a little bit later. But this is a very fine balance. How do you promise something which is tangible and realistic? The answer that we've tried to do is somehow connected directly to something very specific and tangible in the lives of people in the city of Burgas. I'm going to come back to that. Fighting skepticism. It's very easy to engage people, that was mentioned also before the break, who are already engaged. They don't need much to get on board. The real trick is here to get beyond the activists and to get to the people who are skeptical about what you're going to do, especially if you're not an established governmental environmental organization that has a track record of improving the air quality or other aspects of the environment. Then people would face their internal skepticism about whether it's worth it. How can you do it? So how can you pump in something which is, some energy into those people who are skeptical about it? And finally, I think a very important question that all of us have been facing in these pilots is that there is a level of Euroscepticism. Yes, citizens understand why the quality of the air matters in their city, why a certain industrial complex which is near their city is of big concern. Yes, they understand that the local authorities can do something to improve public transport. But when they see that this is something about the European Union, there is a next level of skepticism sometimes engaged. And they say, well, why would, I mean, it's so far, it's so, you know what the skepticism, the Euroscepticism paradigm is. So this was one of the issues that everybody had to address in this campaign. In the case of Burgas, it was relatively easy. Burgas is the only city in this pilot which is not a capital. And of course, being equal to big capitals is a big thing. So yeah, Burgas together with all these big European capitals is participating. It's sort of an artificial motivation, but a motivation that attracts some attention. So, and then we go to the other part. So, engagement strategies for citizen crowdsourcing on air quality. So how do we motivate citizens to do something, some action for better air quality? I think the main challenge here, at least from my perspective, was, first one was, how do you sell the obvious? Everyone is by default interested in the quality of the air they breathe. They've heard, they've read, they've seen so much about it. Just think about it. There was COP27 just, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago in Sharm el-Sheikh. How much of it did you see in the mainstream media? The main thing that I saw about COP27 in the mainstream media was an analysis of the body language between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron. So who was the boss of who and what was their first public meeting and what that meant for Franco-British relations in the future. What was actually achieved at that meeting, which is probably very important, was sort of a, not completely disregarded, but didn't make huge headlines. So selling the obvious is not easy. Everybody is in favor of air better quality. How do you make them actually do something about it? So again, being very critical to what is happening, being very reasonable about the expectation, but also trying to select something which is very specific and which might work to improve slightly an aspect of people's lives. Otherwise, you're getting lost in a big picture and people don't see their place there. And they say, yeah, I know this all. All right, another key element of communications for air quality is getting everybody who really matters in policy making on board locally and nationally. That was again something that colleagues have already mentioned in the previous panel. In our case, it was really important to have people who have something to do with the environment in the city, on the city government level, on the regional government level, activists locally, a few of the journalists who have a more of an interest in this area. So everybody who was interested had to be taken on board. So we had to use them as both as newsmakers and as multipliers to be able to promote what we were doing and make the most of the communication effect. Fighting skepticism, again, I think this is, in both cases, one of the main challenges. And finally, what is really tricky is how do you address extreme views? That would be the same in every part, in every sphere of social life, I guess. But in the environment, there is, this kind of established wish list of things that need to happen that are seen by a part of the mainstream public as extreme. Like, for example, if you say, let's ban cars from the cities, that will probably put off a lot of people because they still need their cars to go to work, to bring their kids to school and so on, to go, about their daily business, because it's probably they will see it as something which is not yet met by the infrastructure which is needed to replace cars in the cities. And if you say let's close all the industrial polluters immediately, then of course you have to have in mind that means thinking of some alternative employment for the people who are working in those big polluting companies. So giving a big voice to those who have very strong ideas, very radical, if you like, ideas about changes in air quality, will inevitably put off another part of the public which is a bit more skeptical and which sees that you can't just by banning stuff, you cannot actually radically improve living standards by banning stuff before creating an alternative for what is already there in place. That is, of course, without going into it, I'm not an environmental scientist, so I have no ready-made solutions. I'm talking only from the perspective of communications. When you have such an far-reaching idea, how do you present it in a way that it doesn't put off people who are afraid that this will influence their lives in a negative aspect in one way or the other? And finally, a few words about our campaign, how we did it in Burgas. This is the face of our campaign. It's called For Clean Air in Burgas. We're gathering the wisdom of the crowd, of the multitude, rather. It's an important crowd, doesn't sound well. So we're gathering the wisdom of the multitude. What we've tried to accomplish is being newsworthy, so picking every possible news item that is related to air quality and building something around it in the media, getting straight the mainstream media on board. Right from the very beginning, even before we launched the first phase, we had stuff on local TV, local radio, in the local news media that is covering the city. Engaging newsmakers, but staying away from their agenda. There are politicians and members of government who would be more than happy to take advantage of a campaign to promote their own political agenda. We had elections twice this year, and we're going to head for a third one. So everything you do is political, of course. Staying relevant over a long period of time. Crowdsourcing for 1 year is no easy stuff. You can't sell crowdsourcing or any other concept for over such an extended period of time. People get tired. People get confused between phases. Okay, I've participated already once, twice, 3 times. What do you want from me now? Which is where we are in phase 4. Why again? Not again. Not a new platform. Come on. It's too long. Okay. Maximizing paid campaigns in social media, of course, it's an important factor. Maximizing organic and multiplier impact, because paid campaigns have their big influence, but of course they need to go together with, for example, using specialized groups, maximizing the outreach that you can achieve through people who have a large followership, a large digital footprint. And of course, gamification. One of the things that we have, I think, quite successfully implemented in Burgas, there was a prize. For each of the phases, there was a prize. So participants would submit their replies to a network of local radio stations, and they would get a small reward. Like, I think we started with, can't remember everything that we gave, but it was... There was a smartwatch measuring your health data, and in the final phase, it was an air purifier, domestic air purifier. So this helped. The result, we wanted to establish some KPIs, objectives. How many of the citizens of Burgas we want to get engaged? We started with 1,000 per 1,000. So far, we are at 1 per 505. So that's about twice better than what we were expecting. And finally, looking forward, next year, communicate and share the impact or explain the lack of thereof. This is what we are going to be thinking about next year as a consortium, not just as implementers in Burgas. We need to be able to describe in very clear words what have we achieved, and if we haven't achieved anything, why? Because we just don't want to contribute to strengthening skepticism any further. Thank you.